The brave little boy stepped into the room and shouted, "I am a wizard," as the whole group laughed at him. He dances with the girl, but she turns into a scary monster that steals away all his spells. He carefully lifted the old branch and aimed for her face before dropping it with a loud thud. She screams in agony, wondering if the monster is actually hurting her because she's too scared to do anything else. He clarifies that magical creatures are meant to defeat human wizards, so they must fight on equal footing rather than winning against them easily. Nearby, an elderly man watched them quietly and remarked, "Oh, they're so lively today." He looks at the boy and says, "Rebus knows. What does that mean for becoming a wizard?" He tells us that making things happen isn't about wishing. Instead, wizards are actually the most powerful people in our society, living like the nobility and knights they inherited from their ancient gods. A nearby villager interrupts the conversation, asking the old man if anyone wants to be cast into wizardry. Rebus asks what he means, and then gets to tell the man about a monster sighting. Rebus confirms that the rumor is true, explaining how a creature was seen at the village entrance just last night, a massive beast hidden in pitch-black shadows so small it looked like an entire house. He reassures the villagers not to panic when they hear this, while the chief heads off to get a powerful wizard who can easily subdue the beast. Meanwhile, the girl's mother feels relieved and warns her child not to enter the forest at all. Rebus warned that anyone should watch out, because without a wizard, you can't easily kill a monster. The old man sat by the fire, checking his watch and then asking, "Did anyone hear this news?" before he turned back to check on the other villager who was still asleep. Rebus looks confused when he hears the question. He talks about the old shepherd who lives on her Zeal Hill. Turan lies alone atop the tall townhouse, staring up at the gray clouds that have turned into a boring gray sheet of sky. He pauses to think deeply about what this quiet place meant for his lonely days. Everyday days bring him the exact same picture of the sky, but tonight his heart's fire grows hotter as he wonders if that stubborn memory could finally fade away forever. Rebus snaps at the guy in a loud complaint about being lazy now. Turan was so frustrated because he couldn't move when the sun was shining right over his face. Rebus scolded the man about his bad manners and demanded to know why he was still keeping a grudge on him. Turan starts a heated conversation about Rebus's tragic loss and accuses him of stealing the sheep, but Rebus keeps quiet shyly while they talk through all that pain together. Turan finally breaks down and snaps back at the old man about his inheritance, while Rebus lets out a furious shout as they try to figure out why the giant shadow leopard seems so dangerous. Rebus looks worried as Turan walks into a room full of sheep, knowing he might be the last one to see them safe, because Rebus is actually terrified right now. Rebus warns Turan to stay close, but Turan knows Rebus only cares about his own sheep and doubts this guy's honesty. A raging storm hits the cliffs as Turan watches over his realm. He wonders why humans can cast spells, but creatures simply become terrifying beasts. Curious to see someone who holds such power, he reaches out toward a lone wizard. He felt the air change as if he had been breathing in blood, and suddenly his heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped tiger. He followed the trail through the woods and traced where the fire started, stopping only when he saw the smoke rise in a sudden burst of dark light. He looks down at the ground and sees Rebus completely shattered, broken up into many tiny fragments. It's not a normal attack. It's definitely a beast. He feels like a big paw is about to step in his way. A shadowy beast stepped out of the darkness, and the truth was confirmed by the evidence. In the quiet village square, a small boy asked his neighbor if they were afraid of scary things. "Your dad showed you how powerful he really is. Ordinary folks would instantly become a mess of disaster if that were true." The boy asks what's going to happen. His dad comforts him about the wizard and promises they'll win it all easily. Back in the deep woods, a fierce beast with eyes burning with rage lunged directly at Turan. The doctor gently pats the patient's hand and says, "It will be okay. I've tried everything." The monster paused before turning away, letting out a deep, dangerous roar that seemed to rip the air from around him as Turan released a swirling light of pure energy. He stared at the darkness he created and wondered why his own power was failing completely. Suddenly, the beast launched again, charging forward with unstoppable speed and fury. The boss looks at the robot and says, "Stop." He pauses for a heartbeat and then keeps going, even though he feels like his next move might be to stop. He slides down the wall, sensing that a direct hit won't save him, and suddenly decides to change course completely before anyone sees him moving. He reaches deep into his coat and pulls out a heavy rock, whispering that shepherds must treat livestock as if they were their own, while the wild beast decides to take the next blow. Turan steps out of the dark and drops the heavy stone onto his rope for you to catch. He shines with a golden stare and flips his hands toward the rock as if it were a giant friend waiting for orders. He pulls the heavy rope forward and screams as the anchor snaps, launching the stone so hard it tears through the sky like a laser bullet. It glides across the clearing, just barely avoiding a tiny dragon's nose, leaving its ear cleanly sliced clean. The heavy object flies off into the distance, disappearing from view before anyone can catch it. The beast lunges with deadly force, ready to strike the king's skull right in the face. A sudden halt occurs, as if the rock is frozen in a moment of pure stillness before it falls. The beast collapsed instantly as it flew away to strike the monster's skull in a final blow that shattered its head completely. Standing right over the dead body, Turan watches helplessly as he realizes that for once in his entire life, he's truly being used to do nothing but stare and wait for the monster's next move. He's staring into the abyss of his own body and sighing in frustration at how much trouble he just created before suddenly seeing it all. It turns out this very wizard, named Turan, was actually the one who messed up everything. 8 years back, a little boy named Elias stumbled upon his true magic by simply making things float. He told his mom all about it with such excitement that when she started screaming for him to calm down, he had already gone mad. She pulled the door open and walked in to ask, "You're making me want to be alive?" She told him she'd stay away from magic, so he could learn how not to show it off. The lady showed her friend how a noble was born out of gods, while a knight came from families that had mixed their lines into wizardry too. Both kinds of men were still thought of as wizards, and she reminded him that some nobles were cruel enough to turn people into slaves, so he should keep his magic secret. It has been 8 years since that promise came true. Now, Turan keeps hiding his face, refusing to show anyone, and refusing even to step off this mountain. A sudden knock from the door filled his ears before he could even answer. The villagers were loud and shouted their way into his house, waiting until he finally stepped out of the dark. The guy stepped out of the house and looked pretty calm, but everyone else was all over him when they accused him of killing someone and grabbed him too hard. They called the man a coward because they believe he let Rabus die. Turan suddenly feels he's blaming the wrong person when he tries to use someone else to hide his mistake. A village neighbor jumps out and trips the old man in front of them as they scramble away from a falling stone. He leaps forward and smashes into a guard with a flick of his hair, sending them flying to the floor immediately. The stranger stepped forward and whispered a secret that sent the man right into a falling abyss. He holds back his strength, letting go of the deadly rage so he can save his friends and family. One by one they all fall, leaving men in defeat and women watching from outside before he walks back inside, reflecting on the chaos that's about to start, then deciding to just crush them anyway if it gets too hard. A sudden knock echoes from the hallway, causing him to yell at everyone else and finally open it with anger before a stranger steps in, apologizing kindly as he waits for an invitation. Turan stares at his empty seat and wonders where he really came from, remembering his mother taught him that being a villager isn't just about the ground beneath your feet, it's about what you say when you try to be nice to someone else. As Turan loosened his grip on the heavy door, he watched helplessly as the room filled with guests before finally letting go, turning that quiet groan into a delicious feast. They began whispering softly as Turan explained how long he'd been living in this place and often missed the outside world. The traveler finds the man's quiet demeanor amusing because he noticed how the old lady had nurtured him. Yet when it turned out that her life ended a long time after, she couldn't have been looking over his shoulder with such care and concern. Turan is puzzled by the silence because he doesn't know what happened next. The man explained that his boss had ordered him to take care of a dangerous puma right before it could eat anyone. He revealed the secret that made him a wizard. The village leader stands at the edge of the village and sees him clearly. He feels his heart race with excitement as he asks a question about what happened to the man who vanished last night. He hears a faint sound near him, but can't make out where it's coming from or if there's a monster hiding behind him. Something like that just happens in these places. Kieran stares at Turan, who looks so completely calm about knowing both the elder and the monster, wondering why they wouldn't try to get him out of bed like a normal human would. He asks if Turan is scared, joking that for a mere shepherd, he's just as brave as anyone else. As his mind dives deeper into the question of who Turan truly is beneath that quiet surface, Turan smiled to remember how his mom used to tease him about being a wizard and asking why no one knew that secret. She told him that nobles were like shepherds who raised dogs to protect their homes, but even if they loved you, they could turn you into anything at any time and ask him to leave for good before he even saw her. He refused with a smile and promised never to learn the truth from anyone, warning that if other wizards found him, they would strip them of all dignity, turning him back into a tool to be used when the moment was right. And as he watched Turan's face light up at his words, he realized something terrifying. Maybe this is just what time had prepared for. Turan felt so absurdly silly at the joke and quickly apologized for not having any sense of humor, while Kieran waved it off with an attitude that seemed to make him feel foolish about being the one who should be apologizing instead of Turan. Kieran admitted he had made this first-time joke about wizards out of sheer flusterment, noting how funny Turan's reaction was, which forced Kieran to keep going on and tease more than he needed to. He decides to shift the mood for a new conversation, offering to help them get along by introducing themselves and explaining why meeting him feels special. The veteran guest, named Kieran, steps forward, telling everyone they are just wandering through life without any specific plans or friends. Turan feels embarrassed because he hasn't introduced himself yet and says he's just a shepherd who's 18 today. Kieran replies in a casual way while telling him he's actually 75, leading Turan to think he's much younger. Kieran tells us how magic makes wizards live longer than regular folks, which naturally shocks the wise old man who listens with keen curiosity as he learns about his own long life. He then asks what led Kieran to become a wandering traveler himself, and the old man explains that after serving the Arabian family for 60 years, he decided to go free from their chains, finding in his freedom a lifestyle Turan finds strangely romantic. As their chat keeps flowing, the mood softens into a comfortable relaxation that makes Kieran feel delighted by his own company. Kieran noticed that time was running out while they were chatting, so he quickly realized just as the sun peeked through the clouds and the morning began to fade. As the sun began to rise over the desert, Kieran carefully pulled out a shiny silver coin from his pocket and handed it gently to Turan, insisting that this precious stone made of Arabian silver cost him way more than any food he had ever eaten. Turan smiled warmly as he took the news and wanted all his hunters to find their prey. Kieran chuckled, trying to keep the conversation light by reminding him he'd probably see each other just a little more often before finally stepping back into the kitchen and cooking away. As soon as he finished his last bite, Kieran turned and waved goodbye, signaling that he was heading out again for a few more meals. Later that day, Turan heads out to the fields as time runs out before the sheep can graze. He commands them to gather and sees them immediately move toward him, obeying his command with no delay. He watched them all while thinking about his first meeting with a wizard, wondering exactly when it had been since they had spoken such naturally and comfortably. He remembers how easy that Kieran's speech was, far beyond what anyone else could have experienced before, concluding that he truly loved this man. Kieran knew knights were just emotionless hunting dogs for arrogant nobles, until Turan showed up and challenged his dog-like belief by revealing there are no more monsters left on his Ariel Hill. As Kieran walked through the forest, he sensed something unusual in the air, but couldn't feel a single monster nearby at all. He looked over, and there was that familiar jagged rock sitting right where the giant beast once landed from such a powerful shot that he wondered if anyone else knew about it yet. The wizard thought about why he might let the village chief hire him. Yet rather than worry, he felt a sudden sense of peace because someone had already protected the land from danger. Suddenly, his sharp senses woke up as he spotted the monster, and he spun to catch a glimpse of how utterly broken its face was before it screamed out a terrifying shriek. Kieran's eyes widen as he instantly identifies Kira as a beast wraith, gasping for air while the creature suddenly lunges at him and forces him to dive back into the grass to escape the blow. Even though magic disappears when it touches death, the rules don't change. A ghostly shape might be born if that energy leaks through instead of being cleaned up properly, which makes things feel just as odd and dangerous right now. He jumped up and felt certain that whoever snapped up the monster was a wizard. He didn't know if they had deliberately let it go or if they just didn't understand what happened next. The story begins when a brave knight refuses to let a fool with no skills stop him from killing down a huge beast, even though someone else might have said otherwise. Forming a bow of pure lightning in his hand, he draws it back and releases a magical arrow. But when it hits the monster, it vanishes instantly. Kieran asks if the beast's mana is even stronger than his own before he can move. Yet seconds later, the creature sinks into the ground and disappears from view. He turns to check a spellbook and finds a ghostly figure standing in front of him, trying to stop him from fighting against it because he thinks magic is actually just a trick he's playing with himself. Kieran watches blood splash from his own arm as the beast lashes out, realizing that even a great knight cannot stop this monster, and only a lower noble or something far more dangerous can. He takes a deep breath before launching himself backward through the air, laughing at how strange it is to face such a powerful wraith in a quiet village without any warning. The beast keeps mutating into something more terrifying as it gains strength, forcing Kieran toward his breaking point. Seeing a threat looming, he vows to save him from falling, and no matter how hard the creature tries to kill him. He pulls every ounce of his power into one grip and watches a monster swing its claws toward him, readying to deliver a devastating blow when they collide. As Kieran and the monster sprint toward one another, a blinding flash shoots upward, a meteoric bolt of lightning that crashes straight down onto the beast, sending it flying across the forest floor before hitting the ground right there. Taran steps forward smoothly and wonders if Kieran feels okay. But his quiet walk makes it seem like he's been waiting for something far more surprising than that shepherd joke being so funny in the first place. Kieran blinked wide-eyed, shocked to hear the answer, wondering how a wizard could stay completely silent about his own magic when everyone else knew so much. Kieran looked at the old man with a grin and asked, "Why did I choose to help you? Maybe Taran would just walk away and let you go anyway." Taran smiled and looked at Kieran with a mix of surprise and curiosity about what the man had just asked for so little. Kieran was listening in a hushed, confused silence as Taran calmly explained how his powers would let him pocket the money without leaving any trouble behind. Kieran laughs and calls the villagers pathetic, which makes Taran wonder exactly what that means. Kieran points out that they're living on a dangerous frontier where their tiny lives tremble and feel like they need constant protection from everything around them. Taran sighed, while Kieran argued that a wizard should act like a god protecting the weak. He admitted that not every wizard agreed on this. Yet the meaning of their words remained clear as they debated life's paths before the dark monster rose again to strike once more. Kieran instantly snaps into a serious tone and orders Taran to pay attention, gently reminding him that the danger here is too great for them to face. He shouts loudly, "Unless anyone is really a noble person, you won't make it." And he orders the captain to run to the village chief so everyone can get out before nightfall. Kieran packs up his gear and shouts, "I'm not letting anyone save me if they want to destroy the rest of us." Kieran admits he spoke with such boldness, but doesn't know how long it will truly last, while Taran calmly reassures him it'll be fine, leaving Kieran bewildered as he questions what that bold attack really means, and Taran clarifies that if the blast he just struck managed to hit, everything would be all right. As Kieran struggles to understand, wondering if that powerful shot wasn't even his full power, believing that a young knight hiding in the mountains could never hunt down such a feared wraith. He stares into the future, watching a story begin where magic doesn't just happen. It reshapes the entire world around him in a way that shocks even his own friends. And as Taran stands before the monster, admitting he shares his own curiosity about limits, he decides to test them here and tells Kieran to step forward instead of joining him in fighting alone. Yet just seconds later, the beast lunges only to be blasted away by a sudden strike, leaving Kieran stunned that he could barely react fast enough and would be nothing but a hindrance. Accepting this moment, Taran offers no help and focuses his entire energy on nurturing the talent before him while pressing onward with relentless attacks, only to see the blows do nothing for the monster. Kieran shouts that no wraith can be killed with just physical means alone, so Taran asks how he's supposed to kill it, and Kieran tells him to use fire or lightning. As the boy ignites a spark within himself, flames flicker to life in his eyes. Yet fire just bounced off Taran, making Kieran realize the spell wasn't working. Kieran was stunned because Taran didn't even know how magic actually works on living things yet. He questioned if he truly had common sense until he figured out that it was Taran who killed the monster and turned it into a wraith, so Kieran never absorbed mana in his life at all. Kieran urged him not to just light up the fire, but to create one first and then launch it toward the target. Even while giving orders, he couldn't help but stare at the boy with pure astonishment at his sheer power. As Taran finds his grip tight on fire, he watches Kieran realize how easy it feels to summon flames, but how hard it becomes to hold them steady in the dark. Taran leaps up and strikes through the air like a roaring flame, creating a superheated wall of energy that shoots past the beast as if nothing were stopping him. A fiery burst explodes at impact, and suddenly, a pale wraith lets out a piercing scream while twisting through the burning inferno. And Kieran barked urgently, urging him to stay focused while pouring out all that mana so the hellfire wouldn't dim. As Taran nodded and added even more fuel to the blaze, his eyes turned into shifting rainbow hues, lighting up each second until the monster's shadow was finally extinguished. Kieran felt a shock so deep he was screaming aloud, staring at the massive wraith and wondering if his own heart could possibly withstand such overwhelming power. Taran finally dropped his shield while the boy asked if the battle was truly over. Kieran stayed frozen in shock at seeing a shepherd from the mountains do it so easily, but immediately warned him that if he didn't want to fight another wraith, he'd have to absorb all the mana left behind. And when Taran asked how it was done, Kieran told him to imagine drawing something into himself, guiding him through the process while Taran nodded and placed his hand on the remains. As he focused deeply, a green aura began to rise from the corpse, gathering tightly into his palm. As the magic rushes into him, it drags all over his body in a whirlwind of heat and shivers. Kieran explains he will feel some special joy from this process, but he can't believe what he sees even with his own eyes when asked if that was truly his first time absorbing mana. He asks Taran if the experience is real, and Taran confirms it without hesitation, showing Kieran that mana grows slowly over time once you've started, which means the best way to boost your power is by killing monsters or other wizards and pulling their energy into you. Kieran felt compelled to apologize sincerely because he knew Taran's huge breakthrough wasn't just luck. It was proof that Taran possessed an extraordinary talent long before anyone could see him. The boy knew exactly what he had to do. He simply told her to wipe away the blood from his own body before doing anything else. Later, tucked away in the hollows of the home, Kieran sat there like an old man in dirty clothes, wiping sweat from his brow and apologizing once more for not being nice enough when he should have been doing something far more important. Taran was told by the crowd that he wasn't any special person at all. He just lived as a regular shepherd with no idea whose real family actually was. His gaze sharpens as he tells Kieran to stop with the formalities, yet the man agrees but still questions why someone so powerful would choose such a life. He explains that he doesn't mean disrespect, but the role simply doesn't suit him, for Taran reveals it was his mother's final wish she held onto until her dying breath. As Taran explains that nobles live below the mountains, and if his identity as a wizard were revealed, he would only be used and discarded. Kieran smiled to see how surprised Taran was when he learned his mom had been very smart. Yet Kieran admits she was wrong about power being bad. It always brings trouble, remembering how noble houses fought over each other just 20 years ago, where the Arabian family and the Zahar family clashed so badly that hundreds of lives went to die. And out of the 3,000 knights of Arabian, more than 900 died, almost a third wiped away. And among them was Denver, Hartman's teacher, and their wife and son, all those he loved so much but tragically slain by House Zahar, forcing him to admit how easily the life of a knight could vanish compared to what a commoner could achieve. Taran looks down at the battlefield with eyes that are half exhausted and half earnest as he admits to his own side. Despite being a brave knight by heart, he knows she was right about one thing. You asked why Taran should leave the mountain, and Kieran simply smiled. Well, if you want freedom to roam and fight monsters, that's fine. But first, you need to know what kind of life it truly costs. He pointed out that even those who serve the gods still fight wars on their own. So he asked Taran for a different offer, perhaps becoming a shepherd himself? If so, Kieran promised no wealth or fame would come with it. You wouldn't want that, Taran admitted, wondering if he could ever truly escape his current struggles without money and power. As Turin listens, he admits it sounds much more interesting than tending sheep. For the first time ever, Kieran feels genuine curiosity about the world beyond. Kieran worries he might be placing unnecessary expectations on him. Yet he still promises to support whatever path Turin chooses before asking about his bloodline ability. He explains that possessing such an ability is what separates nobles from knights, and asks if any spell came unnaturally easy, or if he possesses a truly exceptional ability that does not rely on magic. And although Turin questions if it's just his strength, Kieran points out that mana alone boosts physical power, causing Turin to describe his keen sense of smell and stone-throwing skills, which leads Kieran to argue that heightened senses could be a bloodline trait. Kieran listened intently, and then shouted that he knows which house Turin's skills most resemble, prompting the boy to ask for its name. And as his face darkened, he revealed it belonged to a powerful family called the Pursuers or Hunters, the very house Zahar that once stood as Turin's foe. When Turin heard this, he grew visibly shaken and felt concern at how closely blood matched Kieran's, wondering if he needed to apologize even though they were strangers. Yet Kieran gently reminded him not to carry that weight, reminding him he had no part in the war, and that hatred will never end unless it ever gets to the next generation. When Turin asked if Kieran held regret, Kieran looked confused until the little boy pointed out that regret meant he was suggesting he leave the mountain instead. And Kieran tells us that chasing power will surely push him toward House Zahar, where he sees his own genius shining bright. Yet he also trusts that the hidden goodness inside him is what truly saves the world, because Turin was right to reveal it all, just so we could face our future together. Kieran smiled and said gently that he didn't have to worry too much about this, because he had just not made a choice yet on whether to join his family. Yet Turin calmly declared that his mind was finally clear, so he wanted to try descending the mountain. And while Kieran admitted that it had been thought through well, the boy insisted he wouldn't leave until his injuries were healed, prompting him to call kind with a nod and insist his wounds were just scratches. Even when his heart whispers doubts from the bottom of his chest, he knows the boy standing right in front of him is actually a very kind and wonderful guy. Later inside the house, Kieran explains that true magic needs a specific amount of mana, noting that most people call this essential the key to omnipotence. When Turin asks about what makes that power so powerful, Kieran points out it isn't actually all powerful, because only when one has just enough mana can they truly use magic. The boy then wonders how such a standard is possible. And without hesitation, Kieran breaks the news that magic strength comes down to 3 key things: your birth line, how much you care about it, and whether it fits in with your destiny. He then adds that this birth line is really just who you were raised to be, not a special trait reserved only for powerful knights. He thought maybe healing wounds with magic was too hard for Turin, and asked if he might just be wrong, but then Turin confirmed it wasn't really true. Kieran explains to the group that the strength comes entirely from their heritage, not a long period of hard work or special training needed for anyone in his family. As Turin listens closely, he asks about the second factor of affinity. Kieran explains it's like being familiar with something because it makes performing actions feel natural. It turns out that just having a fireball formed and thrown at you matches his natural way of doing things exactly. As he pulls out his final weapon and presses down on the last factor, he insists that causality matters above all else, even though he still doesn't quite understand why the spell works at all. So he asks Turin what would happen if he tried to kill him directly with mana. Turin lets out a soft sigh, as if a light was just about to appear from his hair, while Kieran nods in agreement, confirming that whenever magic vanishes completely because there's no reason for it or when trying too hard, the spell actually won't work at all. And while Turin reflects on this moment, he starts piecing together what feels like a much better explanation. Instead of just wishing for Kieran's death with magic, he would need to create a logical cause, like conjuring and shooting flames, which is something far more natural than forcing an unnatural outcome. And as Kieran nods in agreement quietly, he thinks that Turin might actually be the right fit for being a scholar rather than a mage. He suddenly changes the subject because he admits he can manage ordinary animals as much as any other creature, which makes him wonder why magic beasts need so much more care. Kieran tells everyone they're magic, but the sheep beside him keeps watching silently as he talks about his own powers. Kieran thinks magic isn't just easy. He insists on knowing exactly how to use the power and what rules control it, which makes Turin think the noble house Zahard might have their own special tricks too. Kieran tells everyone he has mastered both hiding and finding people in action, while Turin nods in agreement and lets out a breath of air, settling into a quiet moment, so completely still that even the world feels too quiet to be heard. Slowly, his shadow began to creep back down the hallway until he vanished completely, staring into a room where no one was looking and asking if it worked, leaving Kieran standing in stunned silence as he saw nothing before him. As the room slowly settles into its quiet silence, Kieran finds himself carrying a heavy sadness that feels like something waiting to happen before Turin finally comes back in. Kieran nods thoughtfully as the long silence stretches out between him and his master, realizing this terrifying power had been waiting for them all along. He tells Turin how the Arabian Nights used it to kill their enemies above everything else, but Kieran gently reminds him that such a magic is not invincible, so he insists on teaching him proper methods from the start before he can even see what they're capable of. Kieran kept telling him that saving his life meant treating him like a true friend, which made sure he trusted his own kindness again. Later, that ugly bald stranger asked if Turin really meant to sell the sheep and let go, insisting on knowing exactly whose job would be handed over and asking him to make a final decision alone without any help from her people. Yet Turin spoke calmly, promising to take them in himself without worrying about their belongings, while warning the village chief not to buy too cheaply or risk releasing the flock anyway. As the leader watched him, seeing a man who kept his word and won't let you harm his property, he reluctantly handed over the money and agreed with all that he said. As Turin and Kieran part ways, Turin wonders if the village folks will even give them back the money they owed, causing him to pause before he could collect it immediately. Kieran shook his head and said, "No way, I'm not going to get anything from Turin." And Turin looked back at the reality that their paths had now split so sharply they couldn't come back together. Yet Kieran sighed, admitting he'd made a mistake by trying to take him along and offering it with such eagerness on his part. Even though Turin felt no anger toward this shift in favor of staying independent, he thanked everyone for the lessons he had learned all along. Kieran hugs him goodbye and tells him to be careful. Turin tells everyone that he hopes to meet again with smiles while watching the night disappear into the distance until it fades away. He then realizes he was wrong about his father and decides to follow him deep into the desert where people are traveling merchants, so he can ask their way home before they get lost. When a man demands to know who he is, Turin explains that he is alone and asks for the nearest city, which turns out to be Mura. After making a move that makes everyone stop and thank them, the man finally lets go and is called back by his group just because they were unsure if he really wanted to follow their advice when no one offered anything for him. And Turin turns around confused, wondering exactly what the man needs, but then the man insists that to get something you have to give it back instead. As the characters draw out their weapons, they decide to pull out their bags and then ask Turin whether he's a bandit. And then the man stepped forward and said, "What would you do if we were?" While someone else calls the act reckless in a dying wasteland, pointing their blades straight toward Turin and commanding him to give up everything just as they still think mercy is possible. The person admits that beating him up wouldn't stop the inevitable bloodshed. Turin took a deep breath and looked at the targets, realizing they were dead people who had never left school again. So he remembered all the drills Kieran used to practice on the wall. He laughed so hard the whole group jumped out from behind the table, thinking that maybe someone did sound like a wizard. He stops breathing and watches the men as the wind howls around them, throwing them back violently before they even realize it was magic. Turin dives toward a puddle of glowing liquid where crystals form instantly as he pulls them out, creating sharp shapes that sparkle in the morning sun. As the group grew focused on their goal, each time they pulled out a new weapon from a pack, the bandits saw it as another opportunity to kill everyone. So they started using them all at once. In that split second, one of the men was pierced through by the crystal, impaling him and ending his life instantly. As Turin looks on, he wonders why his spell isn't working, even though it's supposed to hit areas full of water. He admits that tossing stones does feel really, really fast right now. A wave of panic crests among the remaining bandits, who burst into frantic apologies while their leader plays hide-and-seek with them, maneuvering them to get close behind him and corner him until he can't move any further. Then, Turin steps forward calmly and drives his foot hard into the dirt, launching a cloud of sand that pierces through the ground and turns the battlefield itself into an unstoppable weapon, impaling every single bandit as the silence falls heavy over the place. Turin's trembling voice echoed as he whispered that such a thing is impossible. Yet the man, now terrified, declared he would answer whatever Turin asked. A faint smile forms on the bandit's face as he asks if he will truly be spared. Yet above him, water gathers into a suspended mass as Turin recalls Chiron's stern warning. He must never show mercy to scum like bandits who hurt others just for their own gain, and he spoke with such firmness because he truly understands the boy's nature. As Turin slowly lets go of the truth and saves one life for pity, he quickly kills the man. Then he turns his gaze toward the tracks left by the cart that bandits dragged away, feeling sure time has passed long enough to make those lines worth walking through. As the figure behind the crowd starts to follow him, a heavy weight feels like it's burning inside his chest. He knows he must have killed everyone who walked past. No matter how much guilt hangs over him from before, he knows that letting them go is never an option. His heart swelled with a sudden realization as Chiron's words echoed in his mind. Someone who keeps hurting others right away is a dangerous person he has never met before. As slow tracks fade into distance behind the sand-dust desert winds, Turin's wild emotions start to calm down while he remembers everything he learned. And soon his life's path takes him toward a completely new world as he arrives at Muriai, a tiny city far stranger than where he has lived before. And there he finds it truly beautiful, with endless crowds moving past one another rather than just standing in the crowd. He feels like he's stepping into a completely different world because the buildings in his place have nothing to do with his own life. As he walks through the busy streets and bumps into a shopkeeper who asks for his services, Turin replies with a cold certainty, "I'm not here to buy anything. I was only trying Chiron's suggestion about staying somewhere." The shopkeeper slammed his hand down on the counter and said, "Go ahead. You're not buying fruit." It left Turin stunned, wondering whether rude strangers were common enough in big cities or if there was a strange, hidden rule everyone agreed to follow just for asking questions. Pointing at the fruit, he asks its price, and the merchant replies, "It costs 2 ducats," prompting Turin to wonder what a ducat is even, since the merchant insists he must be an outsider who doesn't know their currency yet, noting that other coins are fine. After turning in his bill, Turin calls out for a place to stay, and the stranger points him straight to the biggest hotel in town. As the door creaked open, the warm welcome from staff member Lena felt like a bright surprise for the traveler. Her kind words about his striking look made everyone feel like they were home again. Turin looks around at the bill and says, "It's only a fiddler coin, 16, then pulls out his notebook and asks, "But do you have any other questions? Maybe a monster that can turn into a dragon?" She laughs as he nods, thinking he might be right. He thought about how hunting monsters was a way to get money while still chasing down those scary creatures, just like Chiron said. He asked, "Why aren't you answering?" And she replied, "Nothing's free," forcing him to order a drink before taking him back to the city hall. And when he asked what this means, she stared at him with disbelief, saying he must be from the countryside before explaining that city halls manage public affairs and are staffed by officials working under his lord, noting it is probably closed for tonight and suggesting they come in the morning if you're looking for monster bounties. And as she stared at him, she asked if he was also a monster hunter, prompting Turin to wonder what that meant. She explained that some say ordinary people can become wizards by hunting monsters, dismissing it as foolish superstition. Yet Turin wondered if it really wasn't false, when suddenly a hand rested on his shoulder and Midden declared that it wasn't superstition at all, that he had witnessed it himself. This surprised Lena, who thought him dead, but Midden insisted he would never die until he became a wizard. As Turin slowly pulls back his hand to let Midden speak, he reveals that the magic of watching monsters grow stronger is actually a great way for everyday heroes to become powerful too. Turin asked to know which ones had turned into wizards, yet Midden stubbornly denied it, insisting the only wizards were the Lord himself and his 3 followers. He stared at Turin's ill-fitting gear and wondered if he was actually ready for battle, leading Turin to show Midden a sling that had certainly survived heavy combat. While Turin shows Midden why his shot hits fast enough for small targets, Midden points out smaller creatures are hunting him like a target too, so they're hoping to find another ranged fighter along the way. But Turin declines with a polite smile, thanking them for their offer. Later that night, while he slept in his room and tried to forget about the chaos of the day, he felt suddenly watched from outside. He remembered Chiron's warning that cities aren't always safe, so instead of running away or shutting down completely, he gently closed the door and let Lena know he was staying nearby. She asked if he really slept, claiming the room would get chilly, so she'd protect him from getting cold instead of letting him go home alone, making Turin think it was all a joke about staying in bed. With a knowing smile, the girl began undressing, whispering that her plans were perfectly clear from start to finish. She keeps growing even more confused as she asks, "What exactly do you mean?" and then tells him that to get whatever he wants, she'll pay only a little. Lena stares at Turin with a look of pure shock, but he doesn't even flinch. His face stays that cold, unchanging stillness, as if the world has already stopped spinning around him. That exact second made him remember how Kindren warned him not to go down those traps again. The lesson stuck in his head like a stubborn brick that he never let slide again, standing tall and unfazed all along. The man had told him to stay careful around ladies in dress and prostitutes, pointing out that most of them carried dangerous diseases. While he could easily resist all that, Turin could unknowingly pass such illnesses forward to another woman in the future, advising him not to let fleeting desire trap him into choices he would regret. And as Turin reflects on this, he begins to realize that living in a city isn't always easy. Recalling his past experiences, Lena now joins him, watching how even the tiniest clues or words can cost you dearly. He quietly concludes that cities are far colder than they seem. As the man keeps turning a page in his mind, he suddenly hears Midden and his friends talking nearby, arguing why he should be bringing that boy from before. One friend points out that Turin didn't seem very useful, while another agrees and says his arrogance would make him the perfect bait. As Midden calmly explains why Turin remembers his younger self so perfectly, even though the other kids think the boy is just too kind to survive a little longer, Turin can't help smiling, wondering if maybe the city isn't completely cold yet. That next morning, he walked into the city hall and asked the man if he needed help. Then Turin asked if he was an official, but instead of a polite answer, the man answered sharply about what else he might be. Turin tells me he's been hunting monsters for months, so I feel a bit off balance at the very moment. As Turin thinks of Chiron's earlier words telling the world he wouldn't get along with him, he decides there isn't any reason to be kind at all. He knows that if anyone wants to treat him well, they just need to find out how his secret wizarding magic works. He was handed the paper by the official, who told him to take a look at it and get it back instead of letting him hold on to it. As Turin watches the scene unfold, he asks if the creature looks like a cat instead of a monster, prompting a sarcastic reply before explaining that once a monster dies, it must be returned to the wizard so mana can disperse and it won't turn into a wraith, warning anyone who abandons such a corpse that they will face death under city law. Turin felt a deep sense of understanding as he recalled how that terrible mistake had ruined everything, so he knew perfectly what would happen again. He asked why knights never hunt monsters and was told they have no time for it because their job is keeping order inside the city. Instead, they handle monsters outside by dealing with people like him. As Turin left, the man muttered that another dead body would likely be added beyond the walls. So soon after Turin returned, holding up a giant monster that tore through his own body like a knife, the crowd gasped at the sheer shock he showed when they found himself fighting for the very thing he stole away from them all to save himself. Turin confirms he did, so he asks if he can receive the reward, but the official rushes off immediately to get it before handing over money, telling him to rest, while everyone else marvels at the corpse's fragile condition and wonders how such a creature could be brought back like this. As the official re-examined the boy's location and asked why Turin was still standing, the young man quickly realized there were just too many monsters in his area and had no idea what to do. Later at the inn, Lena presented him with some of the most expensive items on the menu, admitting she never imagined someone like him could defeat 30 monsters in just 3 days, remarking that he must have earned a fortune from the bounties, while Turin quietly ate almost childlike to explain that money isn't his true goal. Instead, it's the mana of the monsters. Though Lena sensed the limit approaching and realized hunting only weak monsters would no longer push him further, she turned to ask if she had taken a bite of his meal, only for her to remind him he finished it entirely on his own, teasing him for his appetite despite being so slim, while the chef expressed satisfaction at seeing his food enjoyed. As Turin finishes complimenting the meal and heads toward the exit, his friend from Midden abruptly pulls on his coat to ask why he's enjoying this fine dining experience so solo, pointing out that he just got rich recently and wants to help others instead of staying up late. Without hesitation, Turin slashes the man right across his face, knocking him back as he calmly asks if she'd like more charity. And when someone else lunges at him in rage, Turin sidesteps effortlessly while another rushes through with a chair, only to be blocked by ease. Turin flicks his finger to silence the fight, and then watches Lena shout for them to stop while Midden approaches, apologizing sincerely because he already scolded them earlier, explaining that their financial struggles and jealousy are reasons they can't afford trouble again. And after forcing the group to apologize, he reveals they might not even have the funds for their stay, though he insists it's up to them. Yet Turan quietly pulls out a bag of money and hands it over, leaving Midden puzzled about what happened next. It turns out that Turan has paid back a favor Midden once offered, remembering he was trying to help Midden along the way. When Midden wonders why Midden knows so well about it, Turan simply points out that nothing comes for free, asking for information in exchange instead. Midden lets out a big laugh as if he's the only expert on secrets, ready to spill all the juicy stuff he's got inside his head. And later, standing outside the city, Turan reflects that this might be his last hunting expedition there. He notes that Midden gave him details for where to go next and urges him on. He pondered how much useful information he got, considering Midden a genuinely good person, even if Kieran was more experienced, because of that sincerity instead. As the man hurriedly packs his bag for departure, a strange smell jumps out and instantly convinces him to sprint toward it, trying to prove that his instincts have been misled. And as he stepped into the jungle, he spotted markings on a tree just in time to see a man lying down right next to him, his chest torn open and bleeding profusely. That moment brought a familiar face to his mind. Turan recognized him instantly, knowing exactly who this man was. As he looked up, his eyes widened in shock to see a man sprawled motionless on the dirt, surrounded by broken coin money that had been spilled all over the place after he was struck down. He stared at the dead body for a split second before the horror took hold, and he wondered what had happened next. Kneeling beside them is one man barely clinging to life, struggling to speak until he manages to utter just one word, rabbit, and leaving the bewildered Turan confused by his final breath before seeing the terrifying monster eat into its own form. The beast noticed him and lifted its head. Its red eyes glowed brighter as it locked onto him. And in an instant, Turan charges forward at terrifying speed, crashing through a tree that shatters instantly. He knows he was almost hit, but quickly snaps back with his sling and fires a stone beam. 3 stones fly midair toward the creature, which destroys them effortlessly. Turan watches with awe as he sees the beast carefully guarding its friends from any sudden attacks. And when the creature suddenly vanished, Turan was left behind, confused before reappearing behind it with his dagger at his side, driving the monster's neck in before fading away entirely, so he could vanish back into the air himself. The rabbit monster sprinted down into madness, tearing up every tree with a frenzy of rage until time itself stretched too long for its body to hold. Then it finally stopped, screaming out in agony as more blood poured from its wounded limbs. It seems like its power was running out of fuel and finally crashed to the floor in a crushing defeat that wasn't because it was strong enough for itself, but just because Turan had been teasing it all along. As silence finally settles around him, he lets go of his invisibility and walks slowly toward the dead beast, extending a hand toward it as he begins to absorb its mana, instantly feeling how much more power it has than the leopard he once fought near. Nearby, a barely surviving man watches in shock. Turan calmly confirms that he is indeed a wizard. A man breaks down, crying as the Turan figure asks if anyone can even get their belongings and deliver them to their families. The heavy weight of regret presses heavily into his eyes as he remembers Midden recalling the grand, magnificent city known only as Orem. Curiosity sparked within him as he asked what a library is, but Midden explained it holds thousands of books, noting just how the moment Turan heard the word books made his interest undeniable. Then Turan questioned if that was true, and Midden added not only could anyone enter such places, yet Turan wondered how he could gain access to one. Midden opens the door and shouts, "Oh, only wizards could be inside." He heard this first, So Turan whispered a quiet yes and said, "And now I've decided," while Midden asked what he meant. Turan stands over the freshly laid grave and gently says goodbye to his friends, hoping they will find comfort in his words of peace forever. He slowly turned his head and kept walking down the street as if nothing had changed at all. Sometime after that moment, he found himself standing in a long line, feeling a little bit embarrassed and thinking about how impressed he had been when first visiting that tiny city called Muir. Before the massive city of Orem, he realized just how vast it truly is. Judging by its overwhelming scale, he had never imagined so many people would gather just to enter. His gaze shifts to the guards as he wonders if they are searching for criminals. As expected of such a grand city, its systems are far more structured. The guard slammed onto the door and shouted, "Stop! You're in a dirty mess." He didn't believe it. He demanded to know why he couldn't get into his filthy room. A counselor advised him first to wash himself clean so he could try again tomorrow later. Finally, as the doors closed behind him, he stepped inside and stood before a towering structure that made no sense. The story begins when the narrator finds himself in a library filled with strange, glowing lights where people appear to speak without words. It is exactly like what the library's midden said, and his heart beats fast because they're truly building something impossible just by standing there. Approaching the door, he shouted his plans to enter, only to have guards stop him because only wizards were allowed inside. He's been told he must always be one, but when the guard steps in and asks if he wants to become a wizard, he laughs so hard he might die. The guard tried to tap into his own magic with a flicker of thought before Turan finally spoke. Wizards feel each other and know their limits. But then something else happened as that knowing power surged through him again and again. The guard's face fell instantly as he gasped for air because Turan wasn't a normal wizard. He was actually quite powerful on his own level. In that moment of panic, he steps forward to introduce himself as the brave knight of House Voltas, immediately demanding an answer about where the mysterious Turan came from. Turan waits quietly while the other man keeps his secret, only knowing that even with permission from the Master of Voltas, they can't get in without it. When Turan asks what that entails, the guard assures him he will call the house on his own behalf later. He sighs with a growing confusion after realizing his earlier simple plan has now turned into an elaborate bathhouse service attended by maids. The lady stopped her questions and told them, "If you cannot wash yourself, I won't let anyone else." The servants explained that failing to serve a respected guest would be a punishment. Accepting this rule, the ladies allowed themselves to continue thanking him with sincere gratitude. Later, one maid shouted loudly, claiming he was truly amazing. She hides a smile of shame as Turan wonders what's wrong with his face, then apologizes for feeling so overwhelmed about how handsome he looks. A stern master reassures his wife that he has done everything right, even though other maids are whispering and urging him to keep it quiet. That day, someone stepped into the room to find shock as they realized, with wide eyes, that no one else was there but a stranger who had appeared exactly like a beggar. As the guard warned her to stay quiet, Turan stepped forward to tell her his real name, Azella, so that she could finally see him as he really is. He hesitates as she questions where his home really sits, but he knows the answer must be hard to find. She sighed with a sad face and decided to mock his silence by teasing him about not telling her the truth yet. She lets out a burst of pure power that rushes through the air like an invisible wind, forcing him to react while he's lost in his own thoughts. Turan stumbled back as his mana surged dangerously high, forcing him to release it just in time. As soon as those two powerful beams met, the room shook with a sickening vibration, and a guard rushed into place to protect the maidens from the sheer explosion of their opposing energies. A short fight ended with Turan pulling back his magic, leaving Azella to follow him in the shadows. A startled look crosses her face as she touches her shaking fingers. The silence in the room makes everyone wonder what she's thinking about while she laughs and asks him if he'd actually want to get married. Caught completely off guard, Turan freezes as she teases him, confirming it's just a joke while still urging him to think about it, because the seat beside her remains empty. With that, she leaves along with her guards. He watches her go, noticing his own hands tremble and realizing his mana is at least equal to hers. He then wonders if such strength in this city is really considered normal. Turan finally finds himself in the center of the room where Lord Volvas sits on a throne, and for a moment, it feels like he has earned an audience with the greatest man in Orem's land. The magician Turan stepped forward, then paused to let his friend Rug repeat the name, eager to see if anyone was waiting for him at the library before asking about rumors of ancient magic and secret mana sources. Turan spoke softly and said, "I didn't really want anything special." Then he studied the man briefly before Rug gave him a key, saying no one had secrets inside his home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Turan asked him gently how much it mattered if he returned tomorrow or just waited until morning, but he promised not to regret the help he had given him this night. The next morning, the guards checked his ID and welcomed him warmly as a proud guest at the Sky Library. He pushed open the heavy doors, stepped into the dark room, and looked up to see a ceiling that stretched infinitely toward the stars. Finally, he realized exactly who was here. Suddenly, a soft voice called from the shadows, and he looked up to find a little girl standing right in front of him, ready to introduce herself. The Lord spoke first, and then he announced she would give her explanation by his own rule of precedence. Turan listened in surprise because his young friend had suddenly held the power to protect himself from anyone who tried to take his book or leave it inside without permission. He felt uneasy and asked her to get out further so she wouldn't have to read while he was reading alone. She nods with a grin, offering the man an opportunity to explore his interests from every angle, whether it's finding love in a story about a young knight, uncovering secrets through ancient history, or just diving into some daring and adventurous fiction to make him feel whole. He freezes for a split second before Turan bursts into a loud and excited laugh, revealing she wants to share her own simple observations about everyday life with him. Moving fast, she piled the heavy books before him and told them they were too old for help, while guiding him to the right place. She smiled back as he picked one up, feeling how much more meaningful that single book really was. Opening it up carefully, he started reading and watching his face shift like a wave until he understood exactly why these books were so amazing. Then, from that moment on, Turan kept repeating this exact routine, diving deeper into the infinite world of every single book in the library one after another. Turan jumps straight into the deep sea to explore the vast ocean of history, diving in to learn how wizards behave at gatherings, how to build and fix magical gear, and how to tame dangerous creatures that lived during the time before the last great empire fell. The story of a single book adds depth and clarity to a world that used to be nothing but an empty unknown. Slowly, his understanding grows sharper and more vivid. Lord Rugvoltas later praised Turan for how brilliantly he used his own library to win the battle against the invaders. Turan checks his watch and smiles at the boy, saying that while he treats him like a noble, giving him access to court is just a bit of kindness, so he hopes for some kind of compensation next time. Rug tells the tale of a monster emerging in Orum's northern lands and claiming 4 knights were sent by him, but never found after being eaten whole. He insists even a single knight from his own family can't stop it without one person stepping forward to save them personally. Turan leans in quietly, realizing he must protect those who need him above all else. Yet he feels a strange unease knowing wizards seldom step into such dangerous ground. The northbound road remains a crucial, untapped path for travelers since it has been closed for 10 days before anyone else even arrived, which proves exactly why the Lord had so much patience and flexibility when giving the library over to the nobleman. The scene shifts as a large group departs from Orum, Azella commenting that her father is extraordinary to mobilize a guest for a monster hunt, and questioning whether the 4 knights were truly that unreliable. She clarifies that she is not blaming anyone yet, insists the Lord is making a fuss. The man beside her snorts, hinting perhaps that asking for help from God could feel too much like overstepping his boundaries. Azella snaps back to grab the bag, stopping him for a moment before turning to introduce himself as Marvin Valtes, sharing that she looks forward to working with Turan together. Then Turan smiles politely at her. As they walk, Azella urges them to finish up quickly and get back to rest soon. Marvin ducks back as Turan's playful laugh turns into an instant sharp no, but the rest of the group is already starting to panic when suddenly the heavy steel doors slam shut behind them, shattering the carriage just ahead. The wrecked building makes me pause as a guard questions why the beast might be here, and then I realize we didn't just come from the east, the only way out is through the southern gates. The monk studied a tiny print of a beast's face on a piece of wood in absolute quiet, until he finally snapped his fingers and shouted, "That's a monkey!" Azella listened intently while Turan pointed at his handprint, which had shown that he'd been spotted by a peddler and then went back into the woods alone. He insists that if we follow the line of action, we must surely locate it. Azella confessed that she couldn't track the magic at all, asking Marvin, who admitted he was stuck in an impossible loop of spells and power. Stepping forward, Turan volunteers to find the beast while sifting through ancient carriage remnants, and Azella wonders why he might be tracking something her own kind is hiding. He simply picked up a small piece of cloth and explained that he often uses this method. After closing his eyes to inhale the scent, a blue glow appeared as he pointed toward the forest, leading the group onward until the trail ended at a river, where Turan noted the creature had washed its body. Azella scoffed hard as she realized the beast was trying to hide its true purpose entirely. Suddenly, Turan spotted a strange red mark on the ground, then explained that the beast had already decided to hide behind them before his eyes could catch up to it. Ah, the monster that roars and lifts up giant stones. It's a big creature with bright red eyes looking right at you. The knights were shouting louder than ever as they all darted away from the wall together. They burst out of the ground like angry birds, hurling massive rocks at anyone who wasn't ready to catch them before they hit a wall. Turan barely dodged the initial assault, yet his disbelief rippled from that undeniable force of strength. Azella and Marvin struggle hard to escape, but their shielders get knocked out by the heavy blows they receive during the fight, so when Azella throws her own shield aside in relief, it's too late for them to run away from the chaos. He finally realized that his mother was right about what he had been doing. Azella screamed desperately for a fight. Despite the remaining knights making a mighty charge against the monster, it didn't even see them coming and vanished into the shadows instantly. Turan watches the wind howl as the knights rush toward him, only to find they have already run out of air and thrown their stones into a pile of dirt before seeing his own shadow move into view. An invisible creature snatches away Azella and Marvin before they can stop, leaving Azella panicking as her life hangs in the balance. When the rock strikes, it flies so fast you can't even see your own eyes. As Azella and Marvin look around to watch Turan glide effortlessly through the air with a perfect swing in his sling, they're caught off guard by how calm he moves so well. The beast screams once more, and he looks up sharply as danger looms over the scene. The sky roared with a deafening crash as Turan's eyes snapped open to see his monstrous foe fall weightlessly onto the earth, shaking violently beneath him before the silence of battle finally settled over the battlefield. Azella grabbed the chance before she could move back in, letting out a sharp gasp as her magic flared wildly around her fingertips. The sky exploded in fire before the beast could even see it, twisting and coiling like a roaring dragon that surged toward a helpless creature whose body was already crumbling from an earlier blow by Turan. The fiery dragon crashes hard against the wall, sending a huge blast of flames that scorches every object on the ground and turns the creature into mere ash before it hits the floor. As Turan watched the fire dance around him, his breath caught, and suddenly he knew exactly what was happening. The ancient bloodline of House Valtiz's fiery pyromaniacs was taking control here. Now that the danger has vanished, the knights finally find a moment of peace, letting out a breath they never wanted to keep before the next storm sets in. Azella strolled confidently past the crowd, her hand resting casually on the back of a man's neck as he laughed. "It's just a joke," she said, her eyes widening slightly. And then, suddenly, I felt like my heart was beating in my throat when that rock flew into the air and hurt everyone around me. Marvin leaped into the room with a grin on his face, teasingly asking if his sister had been frightened, only for Azella to snap back at him and call out loudly, claiming it was Marvin who screamed like a little girl. Marvin instantly flailed in disbelief, wondering when he ever did anything like that. While knights gathered around the battlefield, they began caring for the wounded, revealing how hard battles cost them. One veteran barked at clowns who kept complaining about broken arms, pointing out that someone else had lost an entire arm and asking for a free bandage. Meanwhile, another knight struggled to hold back blood from a head wound, urging others to use medicine as fast as possible. Turan watched the chaos unfold and whispered in his head that this was just another complete disaster. Though it started with an unexpected monster attack, no matter how bad the wounds were, they could never have stopped a battle of that kind. He then looked at Azella and Marvin, thinking about their incredible mana powers which would make them several times harder than any normal knight. They didn't wait for a chance before stepping in front of anyone else with the least bit more strength, even though their own power was far below theirs. Marvin notices that a stranger stares at him and asks if something is wrong, but Turan immediately shrugs it off as nothing real, before Azella steps in to explain that the most important thing now is to absorb the monster's mana, welcoming Marvin right into their absorption party. The three friends piled up around a shattered piece of ancient magic, clapping their hands as they tried to pull the fading power back in for the fight ahead. As Turan looked into the mirror and remembered how his book made sense, even if many people absorbed energy at once, the magic didn't get worse. It just grew stronger. Azella slammed onto her desk and let out a frustrated sigh, staring at the wall where her hopes were drying up before she could even get another word in. Marvin walks right in front of the door, and that's when he hits the wall. Turan kept going on, and it was the only sign that he wasn't letting go. With his absorption still strong as always, Azella finally knew exactly what she needed right now. The golden light from the setting sun was finally enough to guide the tired soldiers home. As they stepped out into the night, the heavy roar of old battles had quietly melted away behind them. Marvin watches as the dragon fights alone and decides that Turan was the only person who could stop the beast before it took over the kingdom. He feels incredibly grateful for its sudden help. Turan slammed his fist against the glass wall, shouting that this was just a joke and letting go of his own regret about seeing the monster before it could even move. Marvin was shocked by what Turan said. Monsters often get special powers based on their physical traits, like those huge hands and eyes that let them hurl things with super strength and peek around the thick trees they never came before. Turan grinned while realizing his own knowledge was far superior to Marvin's, because he had already discovered it long before any of them had even arrived. Marvin laughed at the idea that the library was just another dusty room where nobody really went, though Azella had tried once to wander around looking for something fun. Unfortunately, she ended up with volumes so hard they barely got through any of them before her mind quit trying to solve them. Turan asks Azella if she'll just ask the librarian for easier books next time. But Azella looks bewildered, wondering why anyone would do it at all, leaving Turan equally puzzled later as he walks back into the library. The librarian smiles warmly by his name as soon as he enters, making him think he made a silly mistake because no knight or commoner would address such a noble person with casual titles. Yet Azella can't help but notice how much her look has changed. He asks how she knows his name before smiling, saying that if he just noticed something on his permit within the library, anyone could see her eyes. When Turan wonders what to call her, she casually admits she has no real name and offers playful suggestions like my love, but Turan firmly chooses simply calling her librarian. He calls him stiff while teasing him about being polite after days of using her, ordering her around to behave so that he can see how it feels, though Turan denies doing anything for the sake of burdening her and asks if she is from an old wizard empire. She calmly refuses, stating she was never human at all, revealing instead that she is a spirit who once lived in living things, but now resides inside the library itself, where she truly belongs. She giggles at the truthful comment he made, yet Turan stops her immediately and yells, "You're lying." Before she can finish defending herself, a sudden, rough shove sends her flying backward as if struck by something unseen. Turan studies her carefully before placing his hand on her stomach. Just as it passes through her body, he is momentarily stunned by what she says. She asks where he is touching and complains that it feels strange. He immediately apologizes while she continues grumbling about how frustrating it is that she cannot directly interfere with intruders, claiming she would have punished every person who dared steal books if she had the power. She told Turan that House Valtes doesn't know about her at all, so the only way anyone can see her is if they become complete themselves. She realizes finding Turan romantic isn't just about love. It's because he can actually do that. When she asked what completeness meant for him, he explained it was the magic term for a wizard's bloodline, and then he asked himself about his own. She tells him to call her dad first, so he can find out if he's truly an orphan before anyone else knows that the secret was too big for the village to hide. At this, her spirit shifted a little bit as she offered to check on him, telling him he just needed his permission before examining his own body. Turan asks what she means, but she laughs first before suddenly thrusting her hand into his chest, passing through him completely and leaving him shocked. She giggles again, telling him now they're connected while Turan awkwardly tells her not to say those things, even though he knows it doesn't hurt much at all. Then she explains that while his bloodline has several minor traits, the main ones are pursuer and hunter types, asking if that suits Hausor, and he confirms it does. But then she reveals another bloodline exists, showing he is mixed. When Turan asks for clarification, she reveals his power comes from two distinct bloodlines. The second one stays sealed while the first begins to flow, a pattern so rare only shows up when he becomes too strong. Turan finally pauses to look at his mother. She always seemed so polished and learned that it was a mistake for him to think she came from a noble family whose blood had faded over time. Yet he still feels grateful because her spirit gave him crucial knowledge. Now, instead of studying alone, Turan turns to her constantly, asking about the hidden meanings in books and wondering if invisible substances actually exist somewhere else in the world. The librarian starts sharing wisdom from ancient books for the first time, telling him that by watching how water shifts and observes its flow, he can see things that have never existed before. Turan quickly realized that these lessons on the laws of nature were treasures beyond measure, giving him a deep understanding of how diseases start from microorganisms, how decay is caused by the activity of germs, and how he grasps principles like the refraction of light, heat generated by friction, injury, and healing. Turan jumps up in excitement when he sees a fresh apple nearby, immediately preparing his hands for a strange test of patience while the fruit slowly turns into nothing at all. He leans close to watch the transformation unfold as fast as possible, only to see the miracle happen before his eyes can even catch it. Even though magic was already capable of making similar changes, Understanding how it works lets him get those exact effects using much less energy. That moment made him realize that by completely rethinking how the world looks, he has suddenly unlocked abilities far beyond any wizard ever before. The librarian watches quietly and feels sad because people aren't learning anymore while the world keeps getting smaller. As their conversation hangs heavy, Turan finally tells them he has to leave, telling them that the owner of this shop is quietly urging him to go. The librarian's spirit jumps in immediately and begs him not to touch her, but she rushes forward right into his arms as they collide. Turan looks down and asks calmly if she can actually leave the library, admitting that she truly cannot. His voice cracks with frustration and longing as he begs him to stay, promising to take good care of him if he declines. But Turan gently refuses, his tone soft yet firm, telling her he must decline first before moving on so he can encourage him to explore beyond. He hints somewhere out there may be remnants of a god's legacy and even spirits with knowledge far greater than hers. Turan assures her he will return from time to time, though she tells him to come whenever he pleases or not at all, masking his sadness behind casual words as it becomes clear she does not want to see him go. Turan offered a small smile while noting that countless books still lay forgotten before him. He then turned away and headed toward House Sahar's base in the unreal desert to the east of Orem, fully intent on finding out what was wrong with his family. Turan steps out and pauses, noticing that the clock ticks so slowly now that rushing doesn't make sense anymore. When those clues finally disappeared after all these years, they didn't just fade away, they simply slipped away without a second glance until long ago. And if those enemies are still lurking behind the curtain, waiting for you to arrive, then their current presence won't vanish at all. Instead, they'll continue training while you absorb their mana. A wild traveler stumbles out of the woods and hears a loud neigh before spotting a powerful horse with a saddle that isn't attacking anyone. It's guarding him as he lies motionless nearby. The guy in charge said, "Look, that's a demon," when he tried to explain how powerful the creature really is. Turan leans in as a dark elf begins to point, saying the horses are the real target and telling the other to make an opening. The companion agrees. It's easy words but hard deeds. A dark elf steps into a world where purple magic suddenly ignites, causing the ground to crackle with rising monsters. Turan finally saw the dark elf spell he thought had been told to him at school and realized how true his fears were. He pauses, guessing who might have started the fight before the elf even takes a bite. Then his eyes light up as he watches two elves devour each other's hands, demanding the first share and ordering the second to take what she has. Dazed, the man stares down at the sea of blood, realizing his own true nature. He vanished into the shadows with a smirk as the girl stared at her dead man, then grinned when the other elf finally took its last bite. Turan rushes in at lightning speed and crushes the monster before she even sees it, while the beast leader screams of panic and orders his creatures to run away toward the herd. A mighty tiger leaps into the air and shoots down a giant stone, yet a fierce beast lunges from behind its snout to stop it, screaming that he knows everyone's name so he can show them who is actually attacking. Oh no! The attacker used magic to hide behind a shadow, so fast you couldn't see where he was going. So she just grabbed her sword and unleashed a roar to show him exactly who's who. Suddenly, a giant wolf lunged forward, pulling out an orange glow that made the whole room seem alive before fading away completely. She caught him in the middle of the forest and yelled, "Don't worry, I found the demon," and immediately ordered her army to swarm before he could even look back at her. Turan jerks his hands together, lighting up a blaze and sending off a massive explosion that knocks out the wolf but leaves the buffalo standing its ground. He charges with little time to spare, barely dodging the blast and crashing into the earth as he realizes how much faster the enemy is than he thought. The night air felt heavy when a jagged bite tore through his leg and started shooting sharp pain with every movement. The buffalo's mighty kick sends Turan flying backward, but instead of landing safely on his back, he hits the ground with a loud thud, knocking over his own head before tumbling down onto the roots of an old oak tree in a panic. A gurgling cough knocked the protagonist down into a pit of monsters and an elf who watched with wide eyes. She laughed, whispering that killing Kel would pay off debts, but then a thunderclap smashed into her face and turned her to dust. The beasts burst into fire and clawed at the horse, but the elf didn't flinch. He just stood tall, ready for whatever came next. He yelled about killing Turan and swearing to make sure she died before he could move on, but a faster strike hit instantly, sending her flying until her body dropped right in front of them. As soon as she fell, those monsters went away, leaving Turan gasping for air while realizing how hard the fight had been for him. As the horse gently nudged its own head, Turan smiled warmly at the arrival. Later that night, the unconscious blonde youth woke up at a campfire with a loud groan and jumped in sheer surprise. The boy looks up as his friend sits at the table, telling them they're finally waking up because someone was taking their life in the dark. The horse trots toward the boy, who gently strokes the animal as he calls her name Tilly. Turan smiled and said she's a great horse, doing more than just guarding her master. She also helps move the old man toward safety. Assis of Habsburg smiled at the boy, who then introduced himself to Turan in a friendly way. Turan asked why the dark elf had suddenly turned hostile toward him, but Assis explained that it wasn't because of any malicious intent. Instead, he was simply leading his retinue through an ambush while on a holy pilgrimage. As Assis starts crying, telling how other races are savage, he doesn't even realize it's going to be so bad. Then he weeps over his lost friends, who loved him from the very beginning. Turan asked if they had ever been his real family, but Assis laughed and said no, because their true identity was that they were knights and servants who had accompanied him all along. In fact, they were more like family to him than anyone else. Turan checks the map, thinks about how nice Assis looks, and then asks his friend, "How many dark elves did you see?" As is said, both the Turans must have been slaughtered together. He pulled up a chair and started searching for Turan again, waiting until only one spot remained near him before he could reach out to confirm a truth. Assis wonders why a man named Turan will be traveling just as far when so many others do not need to leave their homes for the moment. He asks to see if this person has urgent business, but Turan replies that his pilgrimage requires no special arrangement at all. As Assis marvels at his own lack of concern, he wonders once again why such a strong traveler will be forced into such a solitary journey alone. Turan whispered about how hard it was to explain himself, insisting his own strength meant nothing compared to what he had just done. He only ambushed one elf and barely managed to survive the other by riding a red horse, while Assis did the same thing with their power levels in mind. Turan is stunned by the massive power of a single elf who refuses to drain it, so Turan has far less than he would have had if he could absorb that mana. Meanwhile, Assis thinks Turan's raw magic alone won't let him face two necromancers and wonders why someone travels this way before asking if Turan will take the invitation to Habsburg for a safe ride back home. Turan asked what exactly meant repayment, but Assis grinned wildly, declaring that Habsburg were enchanters serving as vassals to the Arabian family, who had built a mighty magical arsenal for decades. He promises to bring the most magical tool he can make, one that truly belongs to Turan. Sometime later, the party ventured even deeper into the forest to bury the fallen soldiers of Assis, whose very presence had already made them feel like a burden on their own hearts. He let out a quiet sigh as the world seemed to finally begin to fade away, feeling a soft relief wash over him, even though his heart began to beat faster with something more urgent than just worry about going back home. As he turned toward Turan, the man nodded slowly and said, "You mean you didn't mock me?" Even though he held a high place, he still felt sorry for everyone who gave up their lives to save others, a feeling that made Turan wonder why anyone would care so much about those small losses when they were just as painful as the ones they did. Turan sat quietly as the sun warmed up, then reached out and said to Assis, "Those feelings are not weakness, they are kindness." Assis' surprise at being caught by the unexpected age gap made him want to lighten the mood immediately as they decided to speak less formally because they were already traveling together. He pointed out that their difference wasn't too huge, so Turan nodded in agreement. As she smiled, she pointed her finger up and declared, "I look forward to having you work with me as a genuine friend." Turan stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his own name should be, then slowly took a step toward the person in front of him, whispering, "I feel you." After getting tired from the long trip, Assis told them to stop and rest for a while before going on again. Turan paused beside the pile of dirt, his eyes darting at an empty cardboard box that had fallen from the sky above them. As the door swung open, the warm aroma of fresh bread and sparkling wine filled the room, revealing what had been hidden away for months. Just another piece of the food and wine they had shared over the last visit. Turan was puzzled, wondering why the air in the box felt so chilly no matter how much he turned on the heater, but Assis insisted that the ice only lasted one full week if kept warm enough. The boy told everyone he could warm up by cooking food again. Then he showed how to make water use a button to release it, how to build a house from sticks, and finally how to make people jump on their backs if anyone walked past them. Assis stepped forward with such excitement because his new outfit was actually a magical cleaning spell that worked without effort. The man looked around at the strange tools, noting their lack of popularity before declaring that a simple outfit made of them could save a life. He grinned at her as she made a promise, promising to give them something much better whenever they got back home and told the house not to refuse. He changed the subject by recounting how many kinds of Turan magic he saw while traveling, forgetting every single one. He began listing them out. Animal control, freezing, levitation, liquid manipulation, enhancement, luminescence, restraint, instant death, Tehran transformation, and lightning strikes. Then he asked if they had mastered all magic or inherited a bloodline that let him use any kind of magic. Tehran narrowed his eyes in thought, but couldn't answer the question. He reminded Assis that they still agreed not to pry into each other's family matters. He laughed fast as if nothing serious had happened, dismissing the idea that his family really was of that kind. He asked Tehran how old he was, knowing he wasn't quite as big yet, but wondering if a 100-year-old could still be in his body. Tehran finally told Assis about the day before it was his birthday, and his own turning age would be 43. Even though he laughed at the big leap in time, the gap of 25 years didn't matter to them at all. Crossing his arms, he pointed out that Tehran must have known just how much power Wraiths could unleash after they killed 2 sorcerers. "Oh, I didn't even expect anyone else like him." Tehran asked, "What did you mean?" As soon as he spoke, Assis immediately answered, "It's about someone really close to me. They're my cousin with a very special bloodline." Tehran wondered if he could ask her to craft magic tools, but Assis shook his head, explaining that she belonged to the main house. Tehran then inquired about the main house, and Aziz explained that his cousin was a princess of Arabonia who might one day become the head of a great house. They kept walking when Aziz explained that unlike normal wizards, the leaders of big houses did not pass their powers simply from parent to child. Many cousins lived together in that same generation, so it was not uncommon for some to beat their parents by a huge margin, but among today's kids, Mysa stood out as having the strongest natural gift. After awakening her magic, she mastered all forms of combat magic within just 10 years. Tehran was surprised.